I never imagined that the person I loved most could become the architect of my humiliation. At first, it was subtle, the quiet sighs when I made a joke, the barely noticeable eye rolls when I spoke in front of her friends. I brushed it off as her wanting to fit in, wanting to feel part of a group that had always seemed just out of my reach. I loved her, so I tolerated these small irritations, believing they would pass. But soon, I began noticing something far more sinister. It started at a casual dinner party, one of those events she insisted I attend even though I barely knew anyone there. I tried to be polite, making small talk and laughing at jokes that weren't funny, but I could feel her friends' eyes on me, curious, skeptical, and then, slowly, cold. One friend leaned over to whisper something to her, and the moment their eyes met, I knew there was a story being woven about me that I had no part in. In the following weeks, the whispers grew louder. I began to hear through mutual acquaintances that she had been telling her friends I was controlling, even abusive. At first, I refused to believe it. My wife, the woman I trusted with everything, portraying me as the villain. Impossible. And yet, the evidence kept mounting. Friends I had trusted started to distance themselves, offering sympathetic nods and empty smiles when I tried to explain. I confronted her one night, thinking that maybe there was a misunderstanding. I remember sitting in our living room, my hands shaking, asking her to tell me the truth. Her face was blank, unreadable, and then, slowly, the words came. She admitted it. Not only had she told them lies, she had carefully constructed scenarios to make me look unreasonable, cruel, and emotionally manipulative. And why? Because she wanted their approval. She wanted to be the star of her social circle, and I, according to her story, was the obstacle to her happiness. The betrayal hit harder than I could ever describe. For years, I had built a life with her, shared my vulnerabilities, and trusted her with every secret I had. And in exchange, she traded my reputation for fleeting approval from people who didn't matter. I tried to process the anger, the hurt, the sheer disbelief. It was suffocating, like drowning while clinging to a rope that had been cut right in front of me. I realized that I had a choice: stay and let this lie continue to poison our lives, or step away before it consumed me entirely. I began to document everything: the messages, the stories, the times her friends confronted me with accusations I had never imagined. Every interaction became a record, a way to protect myself from further manipulation. I wasn't just defending my own dignity, I was saving my sanity. Friends and family who saw the situation unfold slowly started to understand the truth. The same people she had tried to impress began questioning her accounts. The more I stood firm in my reality, the more the walls she had built around her story began to crumble. But it wasn't just about vindication, it was about reclaiming my life. I had been living in a shadow of mistrust and false narratives, and the weight was crushing. In time, I realized that this betrayal revealed more about her character than it ever did about me. I saw the lengths someone could go to manipulate, the depth of deceit one could achieve when driven by a need for social validation. I grieved for the person I thought I knew, and for the life we had imagined together. But I also felt a strange clarity, a lightness in knowing that I could finally disentangle myself from this web of lies. The realization that I had been framed by the person I trusted most sent shockwaves through every part of my life. At first, I felt paralyzed, unsure whether to confront the situation head-on or retreat into silence. But silence would only allow her narrative to grow stronger, so I chose the harder path. I started addressing the lies directly. I reached out to friends who had pulled away, carefully explaining what had really happened. Some listened, some were skeptical, but a few began to see the cracks in her story. Each conversation was exhausting, but with every truth shared, I reclaimed a fragment of my life that had been stolen. Meanwhile, living in the same house with her became unbearable. Every interaction was tinged with tension, every glance a reminder of betrayal. I started keeping a journal, chronicling incidents, conversations, and the subtle ways she continued to manipulate those around her. The act of writing it down was cathartic, a lifeline in a storm that seemed endless. It reminded me that my reality existed, that my truth mattered, even if she had spent months trying to erase it. Her friends, once a source of social comfort for her, became a battlefield. They had been complicit, whether knowingly or through blind trust in her stories. I found myself having to navigate not only her lies but the loyalty she had cultivated among her peers. It was exhausting and emotionally draining, yet I refused to back down. I arranged calm, measured conversations with key individuals, presenting evidence and calmly dismantling the falsehoods she had told. Slowly, the tide began to turn. People who had doubted me started to understand, and some of the friendships she had built on deception began to unravel. Through this process, I realized something essential: the betrayal was not mine to carry alone. While she had acted deceitfully, it was not a reflection of my worth or character. The manipulation she had engaged in revealed more about her insecurities and desire for approval than it did about me. This understanding didn't erase the hurt, but it gave me a sense of perspective. I began focusing on rebuilding myself, my confidence, and my personal boundaries. I also confronted her directly, in a conversation that I had spent weeks preparing for. I spoke without anger, laying out the evidence, the inconsistencies, and the harm caused by her lies. I watched her reactions carefully, noting the flickers of guilt and defensiveness. For the first time, I realized that her need to control the narrative was deeply ingrained, and no amount of reason could entirely undo her patterns. But by speaking my truth, I reclaimed my power. I stopped being the silent victim and became the person who defined her own story. Life after that confrontation was a delicate balance of distance, clarity, and self-recovery. I invested in relationships that were authentic and grounded, seeking people who valued honesty and integrity. I learned to trust my instincts again, to recognize manipulative patterns early, and to protect my emotional space. Every day, I reminded myself that betrayal does not define me, my response does. Over time, I noticed a profound shift. The stress and anxiety that had once consumed me began to ebb. I found joy in small things: a quiet morning with coffee, walks without tension, laughter that wasn't burdened by fear of judgment. Her presence in my life became a source of lessons rather than torment. I understood how far someone could go to seek approval, and I used that knowledge to build stronger boundaries, healthier relationships, and a more resilient sense of self. Eventually, her lies became a story of the past. The friendships she had tried to manipulate fractured under the weight of truth. People who mattered in my life returned, offering support and compassion. I discovered strength I didn't know I had. And with that strength came freedom, a freedom from living in a distorted reality crafted by someone else's insecurities. Looking back, the experience was devastating. But it also became transformative. I had been framed, humiliated, and betrayed, yet I emerged with a clearer understanding of who I was and what I deserved. The journey taught me resilience, the importance of self-trust, and the necessity of confronting deception with courage and evidence. I no longer define myself by her lies. I define myself by my response, my integrity, and my unwavering commitment to truth. The aftermath of her deception extended into every corner of my life. At work, I noticed subtle changes in how colleagues interacted with me. Some were cautious, unsure whether to take sides, while others quietly distanced themselves. Having absorbed fragments of her narrative, I realized that rebuilding trust wasn't just about confronting her or her friends. It was about reasserting my integrity in every interaction, professional and personal. I started documenting my contributions at work meticulously, ensuring that my efforts spoke louder than any whispers of deceit. Slowly, I regained credibility, and those who truly mattered began to see me for who I was, not the distorted image she had painted. Even within my family, the impact lingered. Siblings and parents who had witnessed her charm firsthand found themselves caught in the crossfire of her manipulations. I spent countless hours explaining, clarifying, and reassuring them, sometimes repeatedly, that the abuse of trust had been real and that my reactions were justified. Those conversations were painful. I had to relive betrayal after betrayal, dissecting every instance of manipulation and distortion. Yet, through this painstaking process, my family began to understand and support me in ways that were profoundly healing. Their support became a pillar of strength, a reminder that the bonds built on love and truth could withstand even the most calculated deceit. My personal life, which had once revolved around a shared future with her, had to be restructured entirely. I rediscovered hobbies and interests that had fallen by the wayside, carving out space for personal growth that was previously stifled by the constant tension and deception. I returned to long-neglected friendships, embracing people who valued honesty and emotional transparency. Each reconnection felt like reclaiming a fragment of my life that had been overshadowed by her manipulations. Therapy became an essential part of my journey. Talking to a professional helped me process the layers of betrayal, manipulation, and emotional strain. I learned to identify patterns, recognize red flags, and most importantly, distinguish between my worth and the distortions created by someone else's insecurities. Therapy didn't erase the pain, but it provided tools to manage it and a roadmap for moving forward with confidence. I began journaling more extensively, not just to record events but to articulate my feelings, fears, and victories. These writings became a testament to my resilience and a source of empowerment in moments of doubt. One of the most difficult lessons was understanding the nature of her motivations. Her desire to be accepted by her social circle had overridden her sense of honesty and loyalty. Recognizing that her actions were driven by insecurity rather than malice helped me detach. Emotionally, this detachment didn't mean forgiveness, it meant reclaiming my energy and refusing to let her manipulation control my emotional state. I could see clearly now that her attempts to frame me were a reflection of her own shortcomings, not a reflection of mine. I also learned the power of boundaries. Before, I had tolerated behaviors that were emotionally taxing because I believed compromise was love. Now, I understood that healthy relationships required mutual respect, trust, and accountability. I became more assertive, declining invitations that felt manipulative, disengaging from conversations that twisted reality, and refusing to engage with her attempts to draw me back into her web of deception. This was liberating, though not without conflict, as she occasionally tried to provoke reactions. But each time, I reminded myself that the only control she should have over my life was through my choices, and I was choosing truth and self-respect. As months passed, the intensity of the conflict diminished. She attempted occasional reconciliation, reaching out with messages of apology and promises of changed behavior. But I had learned that words without consistent, demonstrable action were meaningless. I responded calmly, acknowledging her messages but maintaining firm boundaries. My peace was too precious to trade for empty gestures. In doing so, I realized that true power came not from confrontation or revenge, but from living authentically and refusing to allow past betrayals to dictate my present. Through this journey, I also developed a sharper sense of empathy. I understood how manipulation often stems from unmet needs, insecurities, and fear of rejection. While this didn't excuse her behavior, it allowed me to navigate interactions with greater clarity and compassion, especially when others were caught in her sphere of influence. I could offer support without compromising my own well-being, a balance I had not known before. The final phase of this transformation was rebuilding my vision for the future. I set personal goals that reflected my values, not hers, focusing on growth, relationships built on mutual respect, and experiences that enriched my life. Travel, creative projects, and community involvement became avenues for reclaiming joy and demonstrating to myself that my life could be vibrant, fulfilling, and autonomous. Ultimately, her attempt to destroy my reputation, manipulate my relationships, and control my narrative became a catalyst for profound personal growth. I emerged more self-aware, resilient, and empowered. Her actions had tested me in ways I could never have anticipated, yet the outcome was not destruction, it was the forging of a stronger, wiser, and more self-assured version of myself. I reclaimed my story, my identity, and my peace, proving that even in the face of betrayal, integrity and perseverance could triumph. The aftermath of her deception continued to unfold in ways I hadn't anticipated. Even as I rebuilt my professional and personal life, I began to notice subtle reminders of her interference. Mutual acquaintances occasionally whispered stories or passed along opinions clearly influenced by her manipulations. At first, I felt anger flare. Why should I have to defend myself endlessly? But then I realized that my energy was better spent on reinforcing the truth through my actions rather than endless explanations. Demonstrating consistency, reliability, and authenticity gradually eroded the power her lies had held. People began to notice my steadiness, and slowly, credibility returned not because I argued for it but because I lived it. Her attempts to draw me back into conflict didn't cease entirely. She occasionally reached out with messages implying regret, guilt, or even attempts to shift blame back onto me. Each message tested my emotional boundaries. Initially, I wrestled with responses, second-guessing whether ignoring her was strength or cowardice. But over time, I understood that engagement was precisely what she wanted. It fueled her narrative of control. By calmly acknowledging messages without yielding emotionally, I reclaimed power in the most profound way by choosing my peace over reaction. I also noticed the lingering impact of her manipulation on my social circle. Friends who had been subtly swayed by her stories sometimes approached cautiously, unsure of how to interact without creating tension. I chose patience. Instead of confronting or accusing, I let time and behavior speak for me. Over months, the pattern became evident. Those who valued honesty and integrity naturally gravitated back toward me, while those swayed by drama drifted away. It was a painful yet necessary filtration process, separating genuine connections from toxic influences. One of the most enlightening aspects of this journey was understanding the psychological mechanisms behind her behavior. She had operated under fear, insecurity, and a need for validation from her peers. Recognizing this didn't absolve her of responsibility, but it helped me depersonalize the manipulation. Her actions were reflections of her internal struggles, not a measure of my worth. This insight became a powerful tool for maintaining emotional detachment while still processing the deep hurt she caused. Through reflection, I also began to identify patterns within myself that had left me vulnerable. I had always prioritized harmony, often at the expense of confrontation or clear boundaries. While this quality had made me compassionate and understanding, it also made me susceptible to manipulation. By acknowledging these tendencies, I was able to fortify my emotional defenses, setting clearer limits and practicing assertiveness in ways that were both firm and empathetic. As the months passed, I discovered new sources of fulfillment that had previously been overshadowed by the chaos she introduced. Creative projects, professional challenges, and community involvement offered not only distraction but tangible evidence of growth. Each success, small or large, served as a reminder that life could thrive even after profound betrayal. The process was slow, requiring patience and resilience, but it reinforced the lesson that self-reclamation was an active, ongoing endeavor rather than a passive recovery. Family dynamics became a critical focus as well. I invested time in repairing trust with relatives who had been influenced by her narratives. Honest conversations, coupled with consistent actions, allowed bridges to be rebuilt. Some relationships required years of patience and repeated reassurance, while others responded more quickly to transparency. In every case, the guiding principle was consistency. Over time, behavior proved far more compelling than words or accusations. An unexpected aspect of this journey was the development of empathy toward others facing similar betrayals. I began to mentor friends and acquaintances who had encountered manipulative partners or toxic social circles. Sharing my experiences and the strategies I had employed to regain autonomy not only helped others, but reinforced my own sense of growth and resilience. Teaching became a form of therapy, affirming that the lessons learned were meaningful and could be applied constructively beyond my personal situation. The turning point, however, was when I fully embraced the idea that her actions did not define my life trajectory. Earlier, much of my energy had gone into responding to her manipulations, proving my innocence, defending my reputation, navigating social minefields. Once I redirected that energy toward building a life aligned with my values, I noticed a profound shift. I felt empowered, autonomous, and unapologetically authentic. The narrative she tried to control no longer held sway over me. I had reclaimed authorship of my story. Eventually, her influence waned almost entirely. Her attempts to manipulate or provoke me became increasingly transparent to both of us. Where once her words had carried weight, they now echoed hollowly, devoid of the power to disrupt my equilibrium. In this space, I found clarity, self-respect, and freedom. The process of disentangling her impact from my life had been long and exhausting, but the result was a version of myself stronger, wiser, and more grounded than ever before. I also realized that forgiveness was not necessarily about her, it was about liberating myself from lingering resentment. While I did not condone her actions, releasing the weight of bitterness allowed me to focus on living fully in the present. Forgiveness became a conscious act of self-care, a way to reclaim time and emotional energy that would otherwise have been consumed by anger. Through all of this, I redefined what healthy relationships meant to me. Trust, transparency, mutual respect, and clear boundaries became non-negotiables. I approached friendships, professional collaborations, and potential romantic relationships with a heightened sense of awareness, ensuring that history would not repeat itself. This vigilance was not paranoia, it was the product of careful reflection, hard-earned lessons, and a commitment to preserving the integrity of my life. Ultimately, what had begun as a harrowing ordeal, her attempts to manipulate, control, and vilify me transformed into a journey of profound self-discovery. I emerged from it not as a victim, but as a resilient, self-assured individual with a renewed sense of purpose. Her betrayal, once a source of devastation, became a catalyst for personal empowerment. I learned that while we cannot control others' actions, we can control our responses, reclaim our narratives, and build lives grounded in authenticity, integrity, and self-respect.